Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace. Why do otherwise smart, intelligent consultants like to hide behind their brand and their logo and their company?
I would say because smart, intelligent does not align with brave, and people are afraid, very, very afraid to put themselves out in the world.
I guess that's the basis of all of it, isn't it? It's
Absolutely.
just the fear of what? Being wrong. It's a human fear. Being wrong, being criticized.
Rejected. Yeah, being rejected, not being liked, being told there's something, to your point, being told there's something wrong with what you're doing. And if you think about it, these are people who are often, making a shift anyways. So they already might feel like they're on some kind of shaky ground, right? They're pretty sure they can see a vision. They're pretty sure they know where they can have impact and add value. But deep down inside, they may not have bought into that yet. So the very thought of someone else telling them it's a bad idea, or someone else telling them that, the way they think is not, not the right way is, I think, terrifying.
I think it's more than that. I think that's absolutely part of it. I think there's also a certain hesitance to be perceived as a marketer or a salesperson, right?
You mean all the people that come to work with us and say, I'm not a marketer, I'm not a salesperson? Those people?
Yeah, and that statement I think is not only an expression of I don't have the capability, I don't have those skills, but I think in not all cases, but in many cases, it's also an expression of I don't want to be perceived that way.
Yes.
If you think about, the average talking head that you see in your feed on social media, maybe me, right? but it's just this kind of the song and the dance, and it's a lot of showmanship, and think about some of the more crude types of personalities, maybe and that's what social media does, right? The more crude and objectionable it is, the more it kind of rises to the top, right? So I think people have these, people in their mind. Like, to use a simple example, and nothing against him because I like a lot of his material, Gary Vaynerchuk. Mm-hmm. Right? People look at Gary Vee and they go, I'm not Gary Vee. I don't want to be Gary Vee, and I don't want to have that kind of reputation. I don't want people to think. And so they think they have to look and sound a certain way to be a public social media persona, right? They use words like influencers, which I, despise. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of it, is that just they don't necessarily want to be perceived by the market as some talking head on social media.
Yeah, and there's something there as well around, and we have this conversation a lot, separating the notion of being like a social media personality, an influencer, from what we're really trying to do, which is utilizing social media as a tool to connect to people so that you can have conversations, so that you can, start to work with people that you want to work with. And I think, that in and of itself, that conversation, when people can make that leap and realize that what they're not out there to do is just, increase their follower count and see how many impressions they get, and, check every 10 minutes for how many, likes and comments are showing up. Then things change, because it is very different to put yourself out there because you want to attract people that you want to work with. And you really want to move past that, pretty superficial space of being, quote unquote influencer, if that's what we want to call them, into, moving into real life conversations. And, that's really the game, right? We want to move from that space of online content and thought leadership and, all the marketing stuff that people are afraid of, into the thing that they really, really want, which is conversations.
I always used to tell people that, and this is true till today, although stylistically it's a little bit different. I used to tell people that the goal of my content, especially video content, my goal was to simulate what it feels like to sit across the table from me. Like we're having a meeting, like you're a consulting client, like you're a coaching client, like we're having a conversation. And I would record videos with that intent. There was a point where I would record videos with that, like, picture somebody in front of me intent. We even did this whole thing, you may remember, where we'd have the camera like off to the side, and it would be like I was talking to somebody in the live meeting setting, but it was like somebody from our team there that I was talking to, and it was all staged, right? That's good material, but we wanted to kind of simulate that environment. It actually made me feel more comfortable too, thinking that I was talking to a real human being versus a camera. And now, most of our material is coming from actual conversations like this podcast or actual coaching calls and whatnot. So they actually are real conversations. I wasn't trying, and I'm not trying to be some, social media personality with a different persona than how I show up in real world business conversations with clients. In fact, I want them to be as similar as possible, so you get a flavor of what it's like to work with me or to work with us in advance of doing so. That's the whole idea.
Hmm. Yeah, and we're talking about, the overarching kind of fear or resistance to putting yourself out there. But I think if we go back to the original question, which is why do people try to hide behind their company? And it's fascinating, right? Because often the company is them, right? When you started this, the company was you. It's not two different things. But there's this real desire to separate the two, right? To really just pull them apart and, stand on one side as a human being and then have your company out there, the nameless, faceless sort of company out there doing the work for you. And it fascinates me sometimes how, you know, people don't want to move ahead. They struggle to take their message to the market until they have built whatever they perceive as a company in their mind. And it's really, really interesting because, you know, practically speaking, it's no different. It's still that person or that person in their small team doing the work, but there's this level of comfort that's created by having the company name and the logo and all the things.
Yeah, and I think folks, their backgrounds are a major influencing factor here, right? So when you worked in corporate, whether that was just run of the mill corporation or a large consulting professional services organization, they didn't have a lot of talking head personalities. They didn't have a lot of people personifying the brand. Although I do like to remind people that Deloitte and Price and Waterhouse and Coopers and Ernst and Young,
Yes.
right? And whatever KPMG stands for, those were all human beings, right? Those were personal brands that built firms and then built a company, right? And a large global firm at this stage who are now personified by these letters, right? But they were people. They got started as real consultants and professionals who had personal brands and leveraged their reputations to win business. And so I think there is an argument that at a certain point in time, you need to have a corporate identity. Absolutely. I think under 10 million, you shouldn't be worried about it. But there is an argument for that to happen. But even then, I mean, Donald Miller talks about this a lot in the story brand methodology. Some of the most powerful brands, large corporate brands, are personified by a human. Why do we have spokespeople on TV? Why do we have celebrities on TV, right? Why do we hire athletes to do Subway commercials? Because the personification of the brand in human form makes it more relatable.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the other thing that happens is when you have worked in one of those large corporations, what you also know, whether you know it kind of overtly or instinctively, is that the company name does a lot of the work for you. And so I think there's this desire to try to replicate that. And the reality is you can't replicate that right off the bat, right? You can't just suddenly walk in and, just because you created a name and a logo, suddenly people, see you as McKinsey. That's not going to happen. But I think that the habit gets built, right? You're used to allowing the second part of your email address to do so much work for you that you want to find a way to make it happen again.
Well, I worked at KPMG, so if I just call it AM Consulting, that should pretty much do the trick, right? And I don't
Exactly.
care what you call your company. I don't even care what the URL is. The point here is don't hide behind that brand thinking the brand can do all the talking for you and expect that to go well, because that brand means virtually nothing outside of your personal brand.
Yeah. So let's talk about personal brand for a minute. And, we've talked about the sort of why not to rely on the organizational brand, right? The company brand. But I think it's worth just, getting really clear about the value of having a strong personal brand. And what's interesting about this is even for people who are connected to an organization, they're often trying to create a personal brand outside of that. And now we're in a space where the personal brand is really the thing that's going to get you where you want to go. So, yeah, let's talk about why personal brand.
Well, how many company pages and company corporate identities on social media do you engage with, Carrie?
Almost none.
Like, everybody go look at your feeds. Go look at who you follow on Instagram. Go look at who you follow on LinkedIn. Go look at who you actually engage with as a consumer, whether that's a business consumer or a retail consumer. Find me a brand that you engage with. I can't think of a single example in my case. The only examples I can think of are hotels I have followed on Instagram because when I go to those cities, I want to get a flavor for those hotels in advance so I can see if I want to stay there. But that's like, like I'm going to Cairo in a month. So I followed a couple of hotels in Cairo. But once I leave Cairo, I'm going to unfollow those
Mhm.
hotels. Like, it's not like, that's a very temporary thing. I can't think of a single example of a brand that I otherwise have a meaningful engagement with on social media.
Yeah. What's interesting though is that there are a few, right? There are some brands that do this really well and they do kind of personify themselves, right? There's a personality behind it. Those are the only ones that stick because I do the same thing as you do, right? Like temporarily you follow someone because you just want to kind of follow a brand because you want to understand what's going on. Occasionally one grabs me, but it's because of the human behind the scenes who's doing the thing. And they may or may not be, identifying themselves by name, but it is absolutely the personal flair and the personality that makes that stick.
Well, I'll give you an example. So I wear this, you can see that in the camera, this Whoop wristband, right? It's a heart rate variability tracker. It tracks my sleep and my cardiovascular output. And I love this thing. I've been wearing it for a couple of years, right? It's just a company to me. I don't engage with it in social media. I bought the thing. I pay for it. It's a subscription. It's just a company, right? And then recently I discovered they have a podcast. I don't know how I found it, right? They have the Whoop podcast. And the founder, his name is Will Ahmed, he hosts the podcast. And they interview all kinds of people about fitness and athleticism and performance and yada, yada, yada. It's a great podcast. I will tell you, my brand loyalty probably doubled
Mhm.
just because, like, now I actually hear from the founder, the guy who made the thing, right? And I can hear his perspective and his stories and why he built it and what's important to him. And there's an affinity that comes with that to a human being that's going to be far more powerful than a wristband or, a company with a 5-letter name.
Yeah. Yep. So the next question is how do you get past the fear?
I think it starts before any of this. It starts with the fundamental positioning of your business, which we've had some conversations about, right? Like, if you want to thrive in the marketplace, independent of whether or not you have a personal brand, you better have a perspective. You better have an opinion. That's the thing about experts. Experts have opinions, right? And if you're not clear on what your opinions are, or what we call inside 90 Day Pipeline a point of view, right? If you're not clear on what your point of view is on the business problems your clients are facing, the challenges they're facing, the pains they're experiencing, if you don't have a take, something to say about it that is unconventional, that is refreshing, that is unlike what they've heard before, then frankly, you're dead in the water, regardless of whether or not you have a personal brand. Because if you don't have an interesting take that they haven't heard before, something unique, something that's disruptive, then why are they going to work with you? Because you do good work? Who doesn't do good work? Consultants love to hide behind this idea of, well, we do great work, we have a great team. Everybody says that, and nobody can prove it until you work with them. But you can't get someone to work with you by saying we do great work, we have a great team, because there's no way to prove that out or differentiate it. So what's your perspective? What's your point of view? What's your take on the business problems I'm facing? Once you have that, you enable yourself to have a personal brand that can actually communicate something. Well, if you don't have that, then I agree, don't have a personal brand, because then you're just creating noise that no one really wants to pay attention to.